Every morning, just as the first rays of sunlight stretched across Maplewood Lane, the same little figure would appear like clockwork. Leela Bennett, no older than 8, would step out from a white picket fenced house wearing her favorite yellow jacket and bright pink sneakers. In each hand, she firmly gripped a sturdy leash attached to two of the biggest, fluffiest dogs anyone in the neighborhood had ever seen. The scene always made passersby smile. Leela, with her small frame and wide, determined grin, seemed almost comically matched with the dogs, who each stood nearly as tall as her when they jumped up to greet her. Yet there was something about the way she handled them, a confidence well beyond her years, that stopped people in their tracks. The dogs walked calmly beside her, tones lolling happily, as if they had been waiting all night just for this moment. Cars slowed down whenever they passed her. Joggers gave cheerful waves. Elderly couples sitting on their porches would lean forward, chuckling warmly at the sight. It wasn't just the novelty of a young girl walking two giant dogs. It was the happiness she carried with her, like a bright little lantern lighting up the sleepy morning street. Leela would walk a winding path through the neighborhood, her sneakers crunching against the pebbled sidewalks. Sometimes she sang softly to herself. Other times she whistled a tune the dogs seemed to recognize, their tails wagging in rhythm. She had her own little world during these morning hours, and it seemed magical to anyone lucky enough to witness it. Despite her small size, she handled the leashes with surprising skill. If one dog tugged too hard or got distracted by a squirrel, Leela would make a quick clicking sound with her tongue or give a gentle tug, bringing them right back to her side. The dogs responded to her like well-trained partners, full of respect and affection. For weeks, neighbors watched from windows and doorsteps, their curiosity growing stronger with each passing day. Where had this little girl learned to be so good with animals? Were the dogs her family's pets? How did she make it all look so effortless, as if she and the dogs were speaking a language only they understood? Whatever the answer was, one thing became clear. The mornings on Maplewood Lane would never be the same again. Leela and her two fluffy companions had become more than just a charming sight. They had become the neighborhood's little burst of happiness, the kind of simple, beautiful moment that people carried with them all day long. At first, the neighbors simply smiled and waved as Leela passed by, thinking it was a sweet, harmless routine. But as the days turned into weeks, whispers began to weave through the small community like a quiet breeze. People started asking questions. They wondered how a girl so young could control two large dogs so easily, especially when even grown adults sometimes struggled with pets that size. "Have you seen her?" Mrs. Carter asked one afternoon, leaning over her garden fence to speak to Mr. Brooks, who was out watering his front lawn. "She's like a little dog whisperer." Mr. Brooks chuckled, wiping his hands on his gins. "Saw her this morning. Those dogs didn't even pull on the leash once. It's like they're trained better than police dogs." It wasn't just her control over the dogs that caught attention. It was the way they looked at her. Neighbors who took early walks noticed it first. The soft gaze the dogs gave Leela, the way they watched her every movement, as if she were the center of their world. It wasn't the typical energy of dogs just eager to get outside. It was something gentler, something deeper. People began to share their theories. Some thought Leela must have grown up with dogs and simply had a natural touch. Others joked that maybe she secretly trained them in her backyard like a tiny professional. Some of the more imaginative neighbors even mused that maybe Leela had some magical bond with animals, a hidden gift only a few were lucky enough to have. The mystery deepened when neighbors started noticing how her route would sometimes change. One morning, Leela and the dogs would head toward the park. Another day, they would stroll through the wooded trail behind the houses. Occasionally, she would pause at a mailbox, fiddle with a small notebook from her jacket pocket, then set off in a new direction, as if following a carefully crafted plan. Everything about her walks seemed deliberate, almost as if she were on a mission. Children watching from their porches tried to guess where she was going. Adults exchanging morning greetings would murmur, "There she goes again," sharing a smile that said they, too, were captivated by her little parade. The more the neighborhood watched, the more the simple scene turned into a quiet fascination. Leela wasn't just walking dogs, she was creating a story that everyone wanted to know more about. Little did they realize, the secret they were all wondering about was even more astonishing than they had ever imagined. As the days stretched into crisp autumn mornings, the neighbors' curiosity only deepened. It wasn't just that Leela was walking the dogs, it was how she did it that set her apart. There was a rhythm to her steps, a thoughtful precision to the way she guided her furry companions. It felt less like a routine chore and more like a carefully practiced dance. Mr. Avery, who walked his terrier, Rusty, around the same time, often slowed his pace just to watch Leela from a distance. He noticed the little signals she used, a snap of her fingers to change direction, a low whistle to have the dogs sit at corners, a gentle hand motion to get them moving again. It was subtle, almost invisible, unless someone was really paying attention. "She's got a system," he told his wife one evening over dinner. "Not just walking, it's like she's communicating with them without speaking." Other neighbors began to pick up on it too. Mrs. Green, who usually sat knitting by her window, scribbled in her journal after watching Leela for a week. Not random. Each day a pattern. Some days fast, some days slow. Dogs follow like clockwork. Even the dogs themselves behaved differently when they were with Leela. When walked by their owners on weekends, the dogs pulled and tugged at their leashes, chasing after birds and sniffing every tree trunk. But with Leela, they moved smoothly, almost in unison, as if they understood there was something important about their morning walks. Children riding their bikes tried to imitate her, pretending to give hand signals to imaginary dogs. Parents smiled at the sight, amused by how Leela's quiet routine had turned into a neighborhood phenomenon. But there were stranger things, too. A few observant neighbors noticed that Leela sometimes carried a small backpack, and from it she would occasionally pull out something, a treat, perhaps, or a folded piece of paper. Sometimes she stopped by certain houses, not for long, just a brief pause before continuing on. Always quick, always purposeful. "She's on some sort of schedule," muttered Mr. Daniels, the mailman, one morning after seeing her glance at a tiny notebook and adjust her path. The sense of mystery grew with every passing day. What started as admiration turned into a quiet buzz of excitement. It wasn't just that Leela was special, it was that her walks, her signals, her silent conversations with the dogs hinted at something bigger. The neighbors could feel it. A secret was tucked away behind Leela's bright smile and quiet footsteps, and it was only a matter of time before someone uncovered it. It was Mrs. Hanley who finally decided she couldn't stand the mystery any longer. A retired school teacher with a curious spirit and a warm heart, Mrs. Hanley had spent most of her life encouraging young minds to explore and explain the world around them. Watching Leela pass her porch each morning sparked that same familiar feeling, the sense that there was more to this little girl's story than met the eye. One chilly Thursday morning, Mrs. Hanley wrapped a knitted shawl around her shoulders, filled a thermos with hot cocoa, and stationed herself on her front porch a few minutes earlier than usual. She watched as Leela rounded the corner, the dogs padding loyally beside her, their tails swinging in perfect rhythm. As Leela approached, Mrs. Hanley raised her hand in a cheerful wave. "Good morning, dear," she called out, her voice carrying easily in the crisp morning air. Leela paused, a little surprised but smiling brightly. She tugged the dogs gently to a stop and waved back. "Good morning, Mrs. Hanley," she said politely. "Would you like to warm up for a moment?" Mrs. Hanley asked, lifting the thermos. "I have hot cocoa. Marshmallows, too." Leela hesitated for just a second, glancing at the dogs, who looked up at her as if waiting for permission. With a soft click of her tongue, she led them to Mrs. Hanley's porch, tying their leashes carefully to the railing. The dogs immediately sat down, calm and content, as if they knew the porch was a safe place. Mrs. Hanley handed Leela a small cup, and the two of them sat side by side on the porch swing. For a few moments, they simply sipped their cocoa and watched the soft light of morning spread across the neighborhood. "You're very good with them," Mrs. Hanley said finally, nodding toward the dogs. "Better than some grown-ups I've seen." Leela blushed, her cheeks matching the pink of her sneakers. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mrs. Hanley smiled warmly. "I have to ask, dear, where did you learn to be so good with animals? Are these your dogs?" Leela looked down at her cup, swirling the cocoa thoughtfully. Then, with a shy but proud little smile, she said, "They're not mine. I walk them for my neighbors every morning." Mrs. Hanley raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You walk them for other people?" Leela nodded, the words coming more easily now. "I have a little schedule. I walk different dogs before school. I love them all like they're my own." As Mrs. Hanley listened, her heart filled with admiration. It seemed the neighborhood's sweetest mystery wasn't a mystery at all. It was the beginning of something even more extraordinary. Leela took another careful sip of her cocoa, her small hands wrapped tightly around the cup for warmth. For a moment, she seemed unsure if she should say more. Mrs. Hanley simply waited, her kind eyes full of patience, the way only a former teacher could manage. The dogs rested quietly by the porch railing, their heads nestled between their paws, completely at ease. Finally, Leela glanced up. "It started because I wanted a dog of my own," she said softly. "But my parents work a lot. They said we couldn't have one yet. So I thought, maybe I could help with other people's dogs." Mrs. Hanley leaned closer, fascinated. "And you just asked the neighbors?" Leela nodded, her pigtails bouncing. "At first, I asked Mr. Miller. His dog Duke was getting older, and Mr. Miller said it was hard for him to go on long walks. So I offered to help. Then Mrs. Patel heard about it and asked if I could take her dog too. And then Mr. and Mrs. Lopez, and, well, now I have a little group." Mrs. Hanley couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the fact that Leela had taken the initiative. It was the tenderness with which she spoke about it. This wasn't about earning money or rewards. It was about love. "But how do you manage them all?" Mrs. Hanley asked, genuinely curious. "They're big dogs for such a small girl." Leela set her cup down carefully on the porch. She reached into the small backpack at her feet and pulled out a thin, dog-eared notebook. The cover was decorated with hand-drawn paw prints and tiny doodles of dogs. She opened it proudly, revealing neat pages filled with notes. Each page was dedicated to a different dog. There were lists of favorite treats, walking speeds, preferred routes, even small notes like, "Duke gets tired after 15 minutes," or "Bella loves the Shady Park Trail." There were hand-drawn maps and color-coded schedules. Some pages even had tiny smiley faces next to the dog's photos, carefully cut and glued from old snapshots. "I made a system," Leela said with a proud little shrug. "I watched videos online about dog training and read books at the library. I wanted to do it right." Mrs. Hanley felt her throat tighten with emotion. Here was a little girl who, instead of being upset about what she couldn't have, had built something beautiful from her love of animals, a small world of care, trust, and hard work. Looking at Leela, Mrs. Hanley realized something simple but profound. Sometimes the biggest hearts come in the smallest packages. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Mrs. Hanley knew one thing for sure. The neighborhood's secret star had only just begun to shine. Mrs. Hanley leaned closer as Leela flipped through the pages of her notebook, each one filled with more love and detail than the last. There were even colorful tabs sticking out from the sides, marking special notes. "Needs extra water," "afraid of loud noises," "loves belly rubs after walks." It was clear that every dog wasn't just a task on a list for Leela. They were friends. They were family. "You've really thought of everything," Mrs. Hanley said, her voice full of awe. Leela smiled shyly. "I just want them to be happy." Mrs. Hanley noticed another section at the very back of the notebook, marked with glittery star stickers. "What's this part?" she asked gently. Leela's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's my dream plan," she said, flipping eagerly to the pages. They were filled with drawings and ideas. A big building with paw prints on the walls, cozy rooms for dogs, a huge outdoor park area where they could run free. There were even little checklists titled future goals, like learn professional dog training and save money for supplies. "I want to open a place one day," Leela explained, tracing her finger across one of her drawings. "A place where pets who don't have homes can stay, and where people who are too busy or too tired can get help taking care of their dogs." Mrs. Hanley felt her heart swell. In a world often full of rushed mornings and busy days, here was a little girl dreaming not just for herself, but for a world where every animal was safe, cared for, and loved. "That's a beautiful dream, Leela," Mrs. Hanley said warmly. Leela looked up at her, a tiny crease between her eyebrows. "Do you think it's silly?" "Silly?" Mrs. Hanley chuckled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "It's the most wonderful thing I've heard in a very long time." The dogs, sensing the happy energy between the two, wagged their tails and gave soft woofs of approval. Leela giggled and gave them both gentle pats, then tucked the notebook carefully back into her backpack as if it were a treasure. As she stood to continue her morning walk, Mrs. Hanley called after her, "You're already making your dream come true, you know. Every single day." Leela beamed, a light so bright it could chase away any shadow. With the dogs happily trotting beside her and her notebook of dreams safely tucked under her arm, she headed down the street, her bright pink sneakers tapping a joyful rhythm along the pavement. And the neighbors, watching quietly from their porches and windows, could feel it too. Something extraordinary was just beginning. The next few mornings on Maplewood Lane felt different, even brighter somehow. Word about Leela and her dream had spread faster than autumn leaves on a windy day. Mrs. Hanley, of course, had been the first to tell the story, not out of gossip, but out of sheer pride. She spoke of Leela's kindness and her secret notebook full of hopes to everyone she met, at the market, at the library, and even during Sunday church service. Soon, neighbors who once only waved at Leela began stepping out onto their porches to cheer her on as she passed by. "Good morning, Leela," Mr. Avery would call out, raising his coffee mug. "You're doing wonderful work, sweetheart," Mrs. Carter added, tossing a friendly wave from her garden. Some neighbors even started leaving little surprises for her along her walking route. One morning, there was a basket of homemade dog treats waiting by the corner mailbox. Another day, a new leash and collar set appeared, neatly wrapped with a bow and a handwritten card that simply said, "For your growing family of friends." The biggest surprise came one Saturday afternoon when Mrs. Hanley invited Leela and her parents to the local community center for a little gathering. When they arrived, Leela's eyes grew wide with wonder. The center was buzzing with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and even people from nearby streets, all gathered together under a large banner that read, "Helping Leela's dream come true." Tables were set up with donated supplies, bags of dog food, toys, leashes, and training books. A few families had even brought their dogs to meet her, tails wagging and tongues lolling happily. Mr. Daniels, the mailman, handed Leela a decorated box filled with money collected from a community fundraiser. "We all believe in what you're doing," Mrs. Hanley said, kneeling beside her, "and we want to help you make it even bigger." Leela stood speechless, clutching her notebook to her chest. For a long moment, she simply looked around, at the people smiling warmly, at the dogs barking joyfully, at the friends who had once been strangers but now felt like family. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were happy tears. For the first time, Leela realized her dream wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in kindness, in small beginnings, and in the power of one little girl with a heart too big to fit inside her chest. And right there, surrounded by love and laughter, Leela knew this was only the beginning of her incredible journey. From that special day forward, Maplewood Lane was never quite the same. The neighborhood, once filled with quiet routines and polite waves, had blossomed into a community tied together by hope, kindness, and one little girl's dream. And every morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, Leela continued her walks, but now she was never truly alone. Children sometimes joined her for a stretch of the walk, proudly holding an extra leash or carrying water bottles for the dogs. Retired neighbors offered tips from books they had read or volunteered to help with dog care while Leela was at school. Even teenagers, who usually kept to themselves, began stopping by to lend a hand or play with the dogs at the park on weekends. Leela's notebook grew thicker with new pages. She carefully logged every dog she walked, every tip she learned, and every small victory she celebrated. The dream drawings in the back of the notebook started to look less like faraway wishes and more like real plans. One crisp November morning, a letter arrived at Leela's house. It was from the town council, congratulating her and offering a small grant to help young entrepreneurs working for a better community. Tucked inside was a check, enough to buy supplies for a small dog care project she had only dared to imagine until now. When Leela opened the letter, her hands shook with excitement. She ran straight outside to the nearest neighbor's porch, waving the letter high in the air. Mr. Brooks, who had been raking leaves, chuckled as he set down his rake to hear her news. Before long, the entire street seemed to gather around, cheering and clapping as Leela read the letter out loud, her voice bright with pride. With the help of her parents and the kind neighbors who believed in her, Leela started Leela's Lucky Paws, a small weekend dog care and training service based out of the local community center. She offered gentle walks, basic obedience tips, and a warm place for pets whose owners needed a little extra help. And of course, she continued caring for the dogs who had been with her since the beginning. Every step of the way, Leela stayed the same, humble, kind, and endlessly dedicated to her furry friends. And so, every morning, if you happened to stroll down Maplewood Lane, you would still see a little girl with bright pink sneakers, a backpack full of dreams, and 2 or 3 happy dogs trotting loyally at her side. Because some secrets, once uncovered, don't disappear. They grow into something beautiful, something that touches every life they meet.